Chapter 6. Coutts Bank, 440 Strand, London, 1:30 p.m, Friday, 16th of April, AD 1909. Benny was always impressed by the considerate and good-mannered service afforded her by the frock-coated, wing-collared clerks at Coutts Bank. This was the England she'd always heard about, before the wars and the Great Love Plague, and the Cyber Wars and the Daleks came, an England which up to now she had suspected had never really existed. When she had first entered the bank, she had the strongest suspicion that the staff were actually making fun of her. But in time, she realised that their old-fashioned, even for 1909, courtesy and respect for her as a lady, albeit a lady with access to a fortune of nearly $250,000, was genuine. It was a way of life which would be mercilessly stamped out by the Great War, which she alone on this planet knew would come in 5 years' time. But for the moment, Benny was rather enjoying all the attention. A short, roundish man came out from behind the rows of banking counters and welcomed her. There was a worried look on his face as he invited her into the chairman's office. "Miss Summerfield, you know that we at Coutts pride ourselves on the secure service we give to all our account holders," he began. "Get to the point, Mr. Malcolm," she interrupted, with a directness learnt in the military academies of the 25th century. "I assure you, you have nothing to worry about," the chairman said, nonplussed by Benny's forthrightness. "But I regret to say that there was an incident yesterday." "What sort of incident?" "There was an attempt to gain access to your account and safety deposit box." "By a man? The doctor?" "No, a woman, it seems, who was masquerading as your good self. Fortunately, my clerk saw through the deception. The woman was much older than you, madame, but the culprit had vanished before the constabulary could arrive." "So nothing was taken?" When the bank chairman confirmed this, she clapped her hands and stood up. "Well then, there's nothing to worry about, is there?" she said, worried. "Now, I'd like to inspect my safety deposit box." After Mr. Malcolm had left the small private room and shut the door, Benny took the key off the chain around her neck and inserted it into the lock of the safety deposit box. When she had first come to the bank, one of the clerks had remarked that not only was it unusual for a client to have a strong box which was never used, it was also odd that the client had supplied his own box, rather than one of those provided by the bank. Not so unusual, thought Benny, when you realise that the box is made of duranite, an alloy of maconite and duralinium, which will only be invented in about 400 years' time. If anyone wanted to break into the box before then, they'd have to discover nuclear fission first. She turned the key in the lock and opened the box, breathing more easily as she saw that its contents were still safe. Wrapped in a swathe of velvet was the only thing apart from the police box exterior which remained of the TARDIS. A slim ebony bar, whose silver and gold filigree no longer sparkled and winkled as it had done when Benny had first noticed it in the TARDIS console room. On that wet and foggy February morning, when the TARDIS had lurched into being on the banks of the Thames, Benny had awoken in the darkness with a debilitating headache. Though she could see nothing in the blackness, she had an overwhelming and unaccountable feeling of claustrophobia, and as the morning light poured slowly in through the TARDIS's dirty windows... Windows? Benny thought. What windows? She knew the reason why. The TARDIS had gone, deserted her, ejected her, like a living, healthy body would reject a dangerous virus. All she was left with was the cramped wooden box which the TARDIS had chosen as its exterior appearance. As Benny staggered to her feet, she felt a gentle tingling in her hand. She looked down and found she was clutching the long ebony bar from the TARDIS, pulsing silver and gold in the shadows. How it had got into her hand, and why it, alone, of all the TARDIS, had survived the crash, she didn't know. All she knew was that it was important, and when she had learned that she had access to the Doctor's safe at Coots, she had immediately deposited it there. Benny ran her hand along the length of the bar. There was no tingling now. It was as cold as bone, but with a curiously clammy feel to it. Was this what the mysterious imposter had been after yesterday? And if so, how did she, or whoever was employing her, know of its existence? And to what use was she planning to put it? She wished the Doctor, or even Ace, were with her now. They could tell her. They would know. Benny had always left all the running of the TARDIS to the Doctor, causing him to remark once that he'd sometimes appreciate it if she'd treat him more like than just her coach driver, an intergalactic tourist guide. Ace, however, with her interest in technology, was continually poking her nose into places where it was likely to get bitten off, and Benny suspected that the girl from Perivale knew much more about the workings and secrets of the TARDIS than she cared to reveal to either Benny or the Doctor. But now the Doctor was off somewhere pursuing his own sinister schemes, and Ace was God knew where. In the TARDIS proper, that part of the time machine which existed outside the known 5 dimensions, with the Doctor laughing at her behind her back. Benny hated being out of control, hated not knowing what the hell was going on. Too many questions, too many pieces to this bloody jigsaw puzzle. She angrily slammed down the lid of the safety deposit box and called out to Mr. Malcolm that she was ready to leave. On her way out, she drew £10 from her account and hailed a horse-drawn cab in the street and asked to be taken to an address in Bloomsbury. 31½ Museum Street was a tiny, cluttered bookshop situated in an equally cluttered street opposite the British Museum. As Benny entered the shop, another customer was just leaving. "Well, well, well, Miss Summerfield," oozed the familiar voice. "Hello, Bellingham," she replied, recognizing the young aristocrat who had been at Margaret's a few nights before. He seemed even more wasted than usual, and she guessed correctly that he probably hadn't yet been home from a night out in some low-life dive. "What are you doing here?" she asked suspiciously. "Finest occult bookshop in the country," he said. "But I should be asking you what you're doing here. I thought you weren't a believer." "Oh, I've an open mind for most things," she said. "Then perhaps I might invite you to dine with me at the Café Royal tonight." "To most things, I said," she riposted, and swept past the thwarted young aristocrat and into the shop. The walls of the bookshop were lined from floor to ceiling with hundreds of volumes, some bound in fine leather, others falling apart at the seams. Benny idly examined some of the titles. There were books on Chinese astrology, histories of witchcraft, studies of tantric meditations, books of prophecies, biographies of famous magicians throughout the ages. Mystical twaddle, every last one of them, she decided. Curiously dotted around the shop were also glass tanks and bell jars containing insect specimens, some alive, some dead. The small, white-haired head of a shop assistant popped up from behind a pile of books and asked if Benny needed any help. "Yes, I'm looking for the owner, Mr. Khan." "I am Mr. Khan," boomed a voice behind her, and Benny turned to see an impeccably dressed, fat, bald-headed man come towards her. He held out his hand for her to shake. It was curiously dry to the touch, as dry as old leaves. Jared Khan, madame, at your service. As Benny introduced herself, she could feel Khan's cold, dark eyes boring deep into her. She could no, not almost. She could feel his eyes as a physical sensation, violating her privacy, so powerful was his gaze. She forced herself to stare back directly into his eyes, something which probably few people had ever had the courage to do before. Khan frowned, but he was nonetheless impressed. There was something oddly familiar about the man, Benny thought, as though she had met him fleetingly a long, long time ago. Khan smiled, displaying a gold tooth. "And what may I do for you, Professor Summerfield?" "Spring-Hill Jack." "Ah, yes," said Khan, without missing a damn beat, Benny noted. "An interesting local legend, first recorded in the early 19th century, though there are some that say its genesis lies much further back in time. I have a few volumes on urban folk tales which might be of some appeal to you." He moved over to a bookcase, which was creaking under the weight of several thick volumes. "I'm much more interested in the recent revival of the legend," said Benny, watching Khan closely for any reaction. There was none. Even the most hardened con Benny had met would have betrayed his real emotions by an involuntary blink of the eye, or just a slight change in the way he held himself. Either Khan was a total innocent, or he had learnt to control his body language more than anyone else she had ever encountered. And there was one thing Benny knew instinctively. Khan was no innocent. He took a book down from the shelf and began flicking through its pages. "An interesting case," he agreed. "In times of fear, simple folk often attribute supernatural causes to quite ordinary, though of course frightful, occurrences. But I fear that these recent reported sightings of Spring-Hill Jack are just mystical twaddle, I believe your phrase was." Khan smiled at Benny, defying her to say that he could read her mind. But Benny was as skilled as Khan in controlling her own body language. Instead, she indicated another bookshelf and ran her fingers along some of the titles. "The New Dawn and the Kabbalistic Path of Knowledge, Rites and Rhythms for a Herald to the New Dawn, New Dawn, Old Magic." What is this New Dawn, then? "A brotherhood of those interested in our planet's salvation," he said simply. "Only brothers and no sisters?" "I was using the term figuratively, Miss Summerfield. Man has become decadent and evil. We of the New Dawn work to eradicate all that is useless and rotten from mankind, and help man to achieve his true destiny. We search for nothing less than the elixir of life." "Try Khan, then." "I beg your pardon?" "Oh, just a little joke," she said. "So, how do you plan to set up this great world order of yours?" "We have members all over the world," Khan said. "Many in positions of influence. When the time is right, we will take over. And then there will be an end to all wars, all starvation, and all sufferings. And man's survival will be assured." "For a man dedicated to the survival of the human race, you certainly spend a lot of time with insects," she remarked flippantly, and indicated one of the glass tanks, where a locust was basking on a branch under a small electric light. "Insects are the oldest and most successful species this planet has ever known, and an example to us all, Professor Summerfield," Khan said enthusiastically. "Even mankind hasn't succeeded in exterminating one single insect species." "Now that is impressive," agreed Benny. Cockroaches, she recalled someone once saying, were the only species guaranteed to survive a thermonuclear war. There had been a lot of cockroaches in the 25th century. "If the human race were to die tomorrow," continued Khan, "insect life would carry on regardless. Really? Benny didn't quite believe that assertion. Well, all that is, except for 3 species of human lice. Insects might even become the dominant species. When Benny had left the shop, after having failed to get any further information from the bookseller, Khan went over to the telephone and asked for a number in Piccadilly. "Vine Street Police Station," he said when the connection was made. "Get me the Chief Inspector, please." He drummed his long, finely manicured fingers on the desk until the Chief Inspector came on the line. "Good afternoon, Pryor. This is Khan here. I'd like to report a murder." No, you misunderstand me. It hasn't happened yet." Khan sighed with irritation at the policeman's questions. "But it's about to." He looked at his pocket watch. "In, I'd say, about 2 hours' time." 2.5 hours later, Benny arrived home at Dean Street, after once again stopping off at the local pub on the corner. She unlocked the door and staggered into the flat, throwing her handbag, coat, and preposterous hat onto a convenient chair. "Margaret," she called out, "I'm back." There was no reply. Benny frowned. It was unlike Margaret to be out on a Friday evening. It was the one night of the week the old lady usually reserved for writing letters or doing her knitting. On a side table, there was a half-eaten biscuit and a pot of tea. Benny went over to it. It was lukewarm. Warily, Benny entered the kitchen. Margaret was lying on the floor in a pool of blood. She had been brutally beaten around the head with a cast-iron saucepan until her skull had been crushed. There were no signs of a struggle. Benny rushed over to her body to check for a pulse. It was an automatic reaction, but there was no way anyone as old and frail as Margaret could have survived such a vicious attack. Benny rarely cried. In the past 5 years, she had, in fact, cried only twice. But now she let the tears flow freely, as every single kindness the old lady had ever shown her returned to her mind. She was only vaguely aware of a pair of strong arms grabbing her by the shoulders and pulling her to her feet. "You'd better come along with me, miss," said a gruff voice behind her, and she turned to see 3 sombre-looking policemen. "She's been murdered," Benny said, rather unnecessarily. "Well, we can discuss that at the station, miss," said Chief Inspector Pryor. Benny looked back at Margaret's body and then at the 3 policemen. "Hold on a minute. You don't think that I—" "We'll leave that for the judge to decide," said one of the constables, in a voice which said that that was exactly what he did think. "But what motive would I have, you cretins?" "Motive enough, I'd say," came a familiar voice from the doorway. "They were arguing only last night," said Randolph Bellingham. "Miss Waterfield accused Miss Summerfield of embezzling all of her money." "Bellingham, you effeminate paedophile, that's a lie and you know it." "I'm only repeating what I heard, Inspector," Bellingham said, all innocence. "That's as may be, sir, and you'll certainly get the chance to repeat your accusations at the young lady's trial." "Trial?" asked Benny. "That's right, miss," said Pryor. "I'm arresting you for the murder of Miss Margaret Waterfield. Take her away, lads." "This is madness," protested Benny, as the 2 constables handcuffed her. "Don't worry, miss, you'll receive a fair trial," Pryor assured her, as his 2 constables led her away. "This is England, after all." When Benny had left, Pryor and Bellingham glanced knowingly at each other. There would be no fair trial. As members of the New Dawn, They would both see to that.